Surprise! It's not Grosjean. The Dale Coyne racing team has announced a driver today, and it's Ed Jones. Surprise, surprise. We've got quite a few things to talk about here, including the future announcements for Dale Coyne Racing, which may or may not involve Romain Grosjean. Also, we'll be talking about the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and their current flexible plan to start thinking about allowing fans into the Indianapolis 500 this year. We'll be talking about percentage numbers and the likelihood, another percentage number I suppose, whether or not it will actually happen. Let's get into it. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Mobile Command Center here in Daytona Beach, Central Florida. I hope I got that all right this time. It seems like I get corrected on my location every single time I mention it. But certainly, big video today. Some things that we probably could have guessed were coming. Some things we probably could have not guessed were coming. And certainly, attendance at the Indy 500 and Ed Jones at Dale Coyne Racing is going to give us a lot to discuss today. We'll start with the tough news. We'll start with the bad news, I suppose, which I guess shouldn't really be much of a surprise. But the surprise will probably be, maybe for some people who don't have the 2020 hindsight that maybe some of us do, get the joke there, what will be happening in the coming weeks and months with the Indy 500 attendance. So we finally have on record a member of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway higher-ups talking about attendance and starting to talk about figures for the Indy 500. And Adam Stern, our pal and great reporter for the Sports Business Journal, had this tweet, which we'll talk about right here. And it really will, I think, spark a lot of discussion. So Adam had this from Mark Miles. IndyCar CEO Mark Miles says that while the situation is still fluid, and a direct quote which says, "It's really difficult to predict the outcome." He's hoping for at least 50% attendance for the Indy 500 this May. And Adam goes on to say that at a venue the size of IMS, this would be around 150,000 people. Oh boy. 2020 flashbacks is kind of my first thought, and was my first thought when I saw this, because if you guys will remember, IMS started with last year with a reduction to 50% when they initially pushed the race back to August. That, of course, went to 25%, and then, of course, went to 0%. And let's just be honest here. How different is the situation with the pandemic now, and certainly when we're looking at May, than it is right now? So we need to really taper our expectations here. And we need to realize the stuff that we saw happen in 2020 not only has a great chance of happening again, but I would describe it as an over 50% chance that it will happen again. Now, am I going to place a bet 100% on the fact that there will be no fans at the 2021 Indianapolis 500? No, I'm not prepared to do that. I think in some ways, some of the things that we've seen in the state of Indiana, particularly in Indianapolis, which is important because that's the jurisdiction that the Indianapolis Motor Speedway falls under, stuff like the Harvest GP having fans, stuff like the Indianapolis Colts having fans, those things are going to be key in what to kind of expect for the Indianapolis 500. Now, with Mark Miles now on the record and not doing this, thankfully, I will say, not doing the thing that Roger did last year and saying some sort of an ultimatum like, we won't run the 500 unless it has 50% fans. But him throwing out that number is, I would say, ambitious for several reasons. Let's just talk surface level here before we kind of get into nitty-gritty details. 150,000 people would be easily the biggest sporting event that has taken place in the world post-March. That's going to draw a lot of attention, particularly mainstream attention. Many races are able to have fans and have fans at virtually a full capacity in the current state of things in a lot of ways because they don't get any kind of PR blowback for having fans. The other thing, of course, with the Indy 500 is that naturally you're going to have a significantly larger portion of fans attending that event versus, say, let's say a St. Pete, because of the high status, because of how many regular ticket holders hold tickets and the various places in the country they come from. That is going to be difficult to pull off if you didn't face any resistance. And this is where we're going to get into some of the stuff that happened last year. And I think it's important to talk about this and talk about it in specific details, not because I'm trying to throw any shade at anybody, but mainly just because I think we need to be aware of the facts and where the situation lies and where it was or where it may be this year versus last year. So the Indy 500 last year was run without fans. We know that. The reasoning behind that seems very murky. Now, whether that's people who are either blissfully unaware of actually what kind of took place behind the scenes, or people maybe selectively choosing what facts get out there and what facts do not get out there. But I'm going to lay it out on the line here because it's going to really, these factors are going to be what ultimately decides whether or not the Indy 500 A has fans and B how many people actually attend the Indy 500. So the Indianapolis Motor Speedway was like completely set on having fans last year, and I think it was 25% was the number. It was going to be around 70 to 80,000 people. They faced a lot of resistance from the local government, which was run by Mayor Hogsett. I hope I'm saying that right. If I'm not saying that right, sorry, Mayor Joe. But that was something that I think a lot of people expected in the Speedway. What they didn't necessarily expect was the resistance that came from IU Health. Why that was, how it got to the point that it did, escapes me. But ultimately, it got to the point with IU Health where they were willing to go to the Indianapolis Star and have an article written saying that they did not agree with the Speedway's proposal to have fans. And the Speedway then came back and claimed that IU Health, I think, either ignored the request to have input or they didn't give very much input into that situation. Certainly none that would require this big objection that they seem to have in the Indy Star. Things went further than that behind the scenes. And I've mentioned before, I think I mentioned way back in August, I think I described it as Roger had his balls squeezed. And I didn't go very much more specific than that because I didn't really want to be the person who broke that news, particularly in a time and place where emotions were very high on both sides of the argument. I've seen it said in enough places now that I feel like I can say this and not feel like I'm breaking news to a whole lot of people, at least in the know, I'll say that. But ultimately what it came down to was Roger Penske was faced with an ultimatum. He was either going to run the race and have IU Health not send any health care workers at all to service the event, which meant also the infield care center to take care of any drivers who may get injured during the race. And the mayor said, I'm not going to send any kind of police support. So Roger was really up against the wall there and ultimately made the decision, which was, obviously considering the situation, the right one for everybody, to have no fans, to continue the race, have it play on TV, and cut your losses. IMS spent a tremendous amount of money trying to get the race to have fans last year, and ultimately didn't see any return for that investment. And they may not see it this year, because ultimately, as we know, the pandemic is the same as, or worse in some ways, than it was in August. The mayor of Indianapolis is the same. IU Health is the same health partner for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And unless I'm very much mistaken, I would be very surprised if IU Health or the mayor's opinion of the Indy 500 having fans has changed one bit. So that's kind of where we end up. And that's why I kind of end up with the feeling that we're probably setting ourselves up to have a very similar thing play out. And I hope I'm wrong here, but I think we're going to see a very similar situation to 2020. I think it's going to get very ugly very quickly. I think there's going to be a lot of mud slung on both sides of the argument, and it's unfortunate that that may be where we're headed. And I think 50% is optimistic. That's what I'll say on that for now. But obviously, we'll continue to talk about that and cover it as it continues. IndyCar silly season. Let's get onto a lighter note. So, a pretty surprising announcement today with Ed Jones being confirmed at Dale Coyne Racing in car number 18, the Vassar Sullivan Sealmaster Special. And I remember Racer had mentioned it was a possibility that Ed Jones could go to Dale Coyne Racing, but I thought it was an outside possibility. And a lot of the people that I had talked to hadn't necessarily said, "Oh yeah, Jones is the front runner. Jones is the front runner." So it's definitely a surprise from my perspective. I think a lot of us expected it was going to be Romain Grosjean today. Stay tuned. Ed Jones, of course, he ran his first season with Dale Coyne in 2017 and impressed people so much that he got an offer to drive with Chip Ganassi. Obviously, we know how that went. It didn't go very well. I think this is a great opportunity for Ed Jones and for Dale Coyne Racing. I think he's going to surprise a lot of people in that car. We know how fast it was with Sebastian Bourdais. It was a race winner under Sebastian Bourdais. It was very close to the front a lot of times with Santino Ferrucci last year, particularly at the Indianapolis 500, in which case Ed Jones finished third in his first 500 for Dale Coyne in 2017. So this is an exciting prospect. This is one ride that I really want to watch, and I think it's definitely interesting to see Ed Jones get another shot at full time, going back to a team that he has prior experience with, and hopefully some setup information he can use and utilize. I think it could spell some good things for Dale Coyne Racing. Now, let's talk a little bit about the rest of Dale Coyne Racing. My understanding is that they are going to have possibly 3 cars. I've heard some different things. I've heard 2 cars full season and 1 for a half season. I've heard 3 cars full time, splitting drivers. This is how I kind of feel it's going to go based on what I've been told. So there are going to be 3 full-time cars at Dale Coyne Racing. We already know the 18 car. That is Ed Jones. Second car, to my understanding, is going to be a ride split between Romain Grosjean and James Davison. Davison would take the ovals. Grosjean would take the road courses, at least for 2021. Grosjean has left the option open to go to ovals in 22. The third car would be the Rick Ware Racing car, which would be the number 51. And apparently, it would be co-piloted by Pietro Fittipaldi and Cody Ware. Now, my understanding is that Cody Ware would also do the Indianapolis 500, and he would be the first driver to do the NASCAR Coke 600 and Indy 500 double since Kurt Busch did it in 2014. And I would make the assumption that that will be a 4th Dale Coyne Racing car for the Indianapolis 500 under the Rick Ware Racing banner, joining Fittipaldi, Davison, and Jones. We'll have to see if that actually all plays out. Apparently, an announcement is coming next week, at least on the 19 car, and I guess that's where I would expect we'll hear about Grosjean, Davison, and possibly Cody Ware and Pietro Fittipaldi. It's definitely an interesting situation, and there are still some drivers who were attached to Coyne that we've heard nothing about. Enter Charlie Kimball. What's going to happen with him? So, an interesting day for news. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section below. Remember, starting tomorrow, we got more coverage of the Rolex 24 at Daytona. It's the reason I'm in Daytona, of course. So subscribe for that motorsport content. And I will see you in the next video.